Cool. So I am live on Facebook and I'm recording. So hopefully you guys can see me on Facebook. And if not, then I guess I'll just post the recording later. But let me get set up here. Guys, I'm excited for today. I am going to be bringing you guys back to, um, to I guess one of the times where I had like one of my big epiphanies, and a lot of this has to do with vitamin D and um, some cool things I guess that I'm gonna be getting to. I'll talk about here. So let me just get set up here for a second. There's some people that are joining here. As I see Chris is here. There's an iPhone. Not sure who this iPhone is. I don't know if that's you, Christina, but welcome, guys. All right, so here's what I'm going to start out with. This is actually going to be pretty cool. So the main topic for today is going to be vitamin D, but I'm going to come at with this topic with from a different perspective. And so I want to talk about perspective for a second, just to set the frame, right? So we're in a forest and we have a botanist, a lumberjack, and a monk. So when it comes to perspective, a botanist basically sees plants and trees to study. A lumberjack sees trees to chop down, whereas a monk basically sees the miracle of life. So what does this have to do with what does this have to do with vitamin D? Well, the reason why I'm starting with this is because we are basically I want to talk to you from a perspective of a brewer. Okay, I'm not a doctor, I'm a home brewer. And the reason why I bring this up is because, let me get my drawing board here. I want to talk to a specific group of people right now. And this group of people, I want you to know that, there's a perspective of a doctor. We're going to have the perspective of a patient. And then there's me, right? So I'm just going to put here the perspective of a brewer. And the reason why I want to point this out is because I know there's a lot of people who go to doctors and you oftentimes don't get the right information. Oftentimes there's a specific group of people that your lab numbers may be normal. And so your doctor basically tells you, it's like, hey, there's nothing wrong with you. And so you basically leave there and you're wondering like, what's wrong with me? Like the labs are normal, but I don't feel normal, right? And so there's a perspective from the doctor, you're fine. From the patient's perspective, some of these people feel like they're crazy, but I want to tell you right now that you're not. And I want to shed some light on this. And so what I'm going to share with you is my perspective, right? And again, today's topic is going to apply to, pretty much everyone that has autoimmune conditions, whether your labs are normal, whether they're not. You're going to understand why there's a lot of doctors who never even check for vitamin D. And, why and how, when I started to learn about this information, why it made so much sense for me. So I will link to this document after the live is done. I forgot to do that, but let's go ahead and get started. So in order for you to understand vitamin D, the way that I understand vitamin D is I want you to understand that, to me, vitamin D, I see vitamin D as a way to get energy. And if you picture just about any plant or tree, right? A plant or a tree basically grows based on the nutrients of the soil, right? So we talk about water, minerals, pH, temperature, and bacteria. Everything that's here in the soil is what's going to make it grow. But then there's another thing that makes it grow, right? And that's basically sunshine, right? And this is basically vitamin D. This is, to me, the way that we get energy, this is the way that we charge up. Okay, and you're going to understand exactly what I mean by that. So when we're talking about the body, our body works exactly the same way, right? Our gut are just exactly like the root system of a tree. And our guts need vitamin D in order for our bodies to basically uptake nutrients, in order for our bodies to heal, in order for our bodies to recharge. Okay, so I want you to keep this image in mind, because you have a lot of people here that are tired all the time and they don't know why their bodies aren't making any energy. And it's not that your body isn't making any energy, there's a lot of other things going on. And so I want to shed some light on this topic for you. So to get started, let's talk about understanding pH. And we're going to start out with a little bit of a brewing lesson. So I want to give you my perspective first, so you understand. When I first started learning about this, I did not know anything about health. I did not understand what you're going to understand after this video. What I did understand was brewing beer. So here's a book on brewing beer, and it's called Froth, The Science of Beer. You don't have to read this book. You just have to know and understand this little part right here. Chapter 4, Brewing Thermodynamics. All right, we're going to geek out a little bit, but I promise you it's going to be worth it. So just hang on. First off, here's a quote that I love. Beer is proof that God loves us and wants us to be happy. That was a quote by Benjamin Franklin. So here we go. Catabolism is the name given to the multi-step process by which yeast break down sugars to form molecules with less stored energy. Energy that is released by breaking up sugars is moved to the cell's powerhouse, the mitochondria, as the chemical ATP. Okay, so I want to write down some of these words because they're big words, but really ATP is the currency. This is the energy currency. So if you take a battery, right, like a double A battery or whatever, what's the charge inside of it is ATP. And then there's this other word, mitochondria. So mitochondria is basically every cell of your body is literally a battery. Okay, and this is what produces energy. So understand that before I understood health, I had heard words like mitochondria, ATP, and some of these other terms that I guess you're going to hear. But here's a couple of things that I want to point out from this book. One is in the process of breaking down sugar, there's basically two ways that yeast do that. One is aerobic fermentation and the other one's anaerobic fermentation, right? And so this is basically what I want to point out here. Let me read up from, so here's another book, How to Brew Beer by John Palmer. So when it comes to fermentation, right? So brewing beer, you take yeast eats sugar, turn it into beer. Fermentation, basically, the yeast start adjusting to the work conditions and undergo a period of high growth. The yeast use any available oxygen in the wort to facilitate their growth process. Okay, they can use other methods to adapt and grow in the absence of oxygen, but they do it in much more efficiently with oxygen. So basically what that just said is that yeast need oxygen to grow. And it's not just yeast, a lot of creatures, right? When we're talking about yeast and bacteria, this is what lives in your gut, okay? So this is why this made sense to me. All right. What I want to point out, and I'm going to draw this out, but I just want you to see where I get this stuff from. So here's a book on yeast, right? This brewing beer, yeast kind of thing. So there's a graph in here. I don't know if you can see, but it's basically a graph that shows the amount of oxygen and how that level of oxygen basically drops throughout fermentation. So I'm going to draw this graph this way just so that you can see and understand the videos that I'm going to share with you here in a second. But essentially, what all of that is saying is that, and you'll understand this graph here in a second, when oxygen levels drop, yeast begin to enter what's called anaerobic fermentation, meaning they begin to ferment beer without oxygen. Okay, the oxygen levels essentially drop going this way. Okay, now let's watch some of the videos. These are the videos that, when I talk about when I had my big epiphany and all of these things going on, these are the videos that I watched that basically did that for me. So there is this one. Actually, I have this one ready here to go. All right, so I'm gonna play this just like a minute or so. And what we're gonna listen for in here is going back to perspective so you understand why oftentimes this information doesn't get to people. And then we'll go from there and talk about oxygen.
Another problem that happens is that each of us contain perhaps as many as 1 trillion bugs. And those bugs are asleep as long as oxygen is available. However, if oxygen becomes unavailable, the oxygen levels drop, those bugs wake up. And when they wake up, they want to have lunch. And they want to have you for lunch. And so since they don't have teeth to bite into your cells, they put out digestive enzymes so they can dissolve your cells and get the nutrients out of them. So one of the problems is that those bugs having lunch not only are damaging the tissue right around them, but those enzymes get in our bloodstream and go to distant places and damage cells there as well. So, for example, if I have strep throat, I've got a strep bacteria having lunch on my tonsil. Now, to me, when he's having lunch, I'm kind of annoyed about it because it hurts like crazy, right? I got a strep throat. Well, we all know that the enzymes that the strep puts out while it's having a picnic on my tonsil can get in my bloodstream and go down and scar my heart valves, right? Call that rheumatic heart disease. Comes from strep bugs having lunch on your tonsil. Those same things can go down and damage my knees as well, rheumatic arthritis. Well, the same process goes on throughout the body. So I may have low voltage in my gallbladder, and the bugs that are in there having lunch on the gallbladder put out toxins that commonly damage the brain. So the reason my brain isn't working very well be because I got low voltage in my gallbladder. You see how that works? So whenever you hear somebody say you have an autoimmune disease, well, I don't believe there is such a thing as an autoimmune disease. I think it's just bugs having lunch and these enzymes going someplace causing damage. And when we go biopsy that area, we see damage. We see inflammatory cells, but we can't culture anything there. So we say, oh, the body's attacking itself. Well, the body's not attacking itself. These enzymes that the bugs are putting out are attacking it. And one of the reasons I can say that with some confidence is I've taken a fair number of people that have a lupus with a high blood test called ANA, which diagnoses lupus. You go in and raise the voltage, kill the bugs, and the ANA goes back to normal, and the people get well. So it's my belief then that these things we call autoimmune diseases are simply low voltage, low oxygen, bugs having lunch, enzymes going places and causing grief. So then, of course, if voltage gets low enough, then one of the bugs that begins to grow are fungal bugs, which you can actually see in the blood with a phase contrast or dark field microscope.
All right, so this video is long, and again, I'll link to this document where you can get the link to this video. But let's recap, because basically what Dr. Jerry Tennant here was saying, it's exactly what made sense. It was my epiphany when I realized when he said, hey, when voltage gets low, to me, that means, hey, when oxygen levels get low, when pH gets low, and you're going to understand this a little bit better. Basically, what that means is that certain type of bacteria begin to grow, right? He called it fungal, like there's a fungal type of bacteria. That's basically yeast, right? Yeast overgrowth. Yeast are basically fungi, essentially. They begin to grow, and the way that these creatures eat is that they release enzymes. right? Enzymes basically digest, they break down stuff. And so now you have all these digestive enzymes going throughout the body. And what enzymes do is they break down protein. So, but if they're bad bacteria, they're basically eating you, right? Just like I said, like with strep throat, right? There's people that have, thyroid, certain antibodies, like basically different types of enzymes from bad bacteria attacking their thyroid, and like in my case, I had, elevated liver enzymes. There's all kinds of different things, but essentially what is happening is low oxygen, low voltage, and it's just bad bacteria growing in your gut that is releasing toxic waste all over the body. And that's basically what an autoimmune condition is. And this is how I understood that, autoimmune condition to me is basically there's bad bacteria in your gut. And also that basically also means that you probably lack some of the good bacteria that will normally keep that bacteria, at bay, under control. So let's go back. So there's two parts to that one video. This is part two. And this is actually the part on perspective.
I don't know if you know this or not, but Professor Andrew Weil is a famous medical doctor out in Arizona at the medical school. Most of you know Andy Weil. Well, the FDA and the FTC sent him a letter saying he must stop telling people that taking herbs to improve their immune system will help keep them from getting the flu, or they'd put him in jail. And so then there was a professor last year who at Boston University, a dermatologist, a famous one, who said it's good for you to go out in the sun and get vitamin D. And so they fired him. And so now there are laws that are passed that are going to keep people like Sally Fallon from telling her story about food and nutrition. So the only way, and in Texas, it's very difficult for MDs to talk about nutrition without losing their license. So I'm not talking to you today using my MD license. I'm talking to you today using my naturopathic license and in my role as an ecclesiastical counselor.
All right, so I think that's important to share for, especially for some people that may wonder where I get information from or why some of this information isn't well known. It's just, I guess, how it's set up. But once you begin to understand some of this stuff, and this is why, like, for me, when I heard this information, it made total and complete sense. This part right here,
I can figure out how to make one cell work, I can make them all work, because even though a brain cell and a liver cell look different, they really have the same hardware, don't they? Just like a computer, a laptop looks different than a desktop, but they're still the same hardware. It's just a matter of different software. And so I thought if I could figure out how to make one cell work, I could make them all work. And so I began to read cellular biology books, and what I discovered was that most all of the books said cells have to run in very narrow ranges of things, and particularly something that caught my attention was a narrow range of pH. Well, you can see that cells have to have a narrow range of glucose, and if that's too high, we call it diabetes, and if it's too low, we call it hypoglycemia. Cells have to run in a very narrow range of temperature, and if it's too high, we call it a fever, and if it's too low, it shows that you have hypothyroidism. You have to have a very narrow range of blood pressure, and if it's too high, we call it hypertension, and too low, hypotension. But pH and oxygen is something that doctors rarely look at unless you're in ICU. But I was particularly fascinated about the subject of pH. So let's take a look at some electronic terms. Here's the thing. pH stands for potential hydrogen, but is really, although it's about acid-base balance, it's really about voltage. The way you measure pH is you take a sophisticated voltmeter and you measure the voltage of a solution. Now, there's something different about a solution than a copper wire. The copper wires that are bringing voltage into the building here are either turned on or off. So there are either electrons in those wires or not, correct? Turn the switch on, the electrons are there. You turn the switch off, they go away. But in a solution, like a glass of water, you have an option. That water can either be an electron donor or it can be an electron stealer. And so that's what's different about measuring voltage in a solution, is that it has the option of being one or the other. Well, by convention, if the solution happens to be an electron donor, we put a minus sign in front of the voltage. If it happens to be an electron stealer, we put a plus sign in front of the voltage. So when you measure the voltage of a solution, if it measures plus 400 millivolts, we convert that to a logarithmic scale from 0 to 14 and call plus 400 millivolts a pH of 0, and a minus 400 millivolts, with minus meaning electron donor, is the same thing as a pH of 14. So I found it's much easier to think about what's going on by thinking in terms of voltage rather than thinking in terms of pH, right? Well, what this tells us is this. Every cellular biology book will tell you that cells are designed to run at a pH of between 7.35 and 7.45. Well, what that means is that a pH of 7.35 is the same thing as minus 20 millivolts. And what does minus mean? Electron donor, right?
All right. So let me translate that a little bit for you guys here. That graph that I drew earlier, it's essentially what what he's talking about here, right? So he's talking about the pH scale, 7 being neutral, 0 being acid, and 14 being alkaline. Water is essentially a pH of 7. It's supposed to be, right? That's the neutral pH. Once you go over here, that's alkaline. This is basically acid. And so what he was basically saying is that, slightly alkaline, about minus 20 millivolts, this is where cells operate, right? Every cell of your body, right? We're talking about every cell of your body being, a little battery, like what produces energy. It needs to operate at around this slightly alkaline pH, this minus 20 millivolts. So let's keep going over here.
So obviously, no matter what's wrong with you, we need to put enough electrons in to you make new cells very rapidly. The rods and cones in your eye right now are only 48 hours old. The skin you're sitting in is just 6 weeks old. Your liver's 8 weeks old. Your nervous system's 8 months old, and your bones are a year old. So every year we completely change ourselves. And so we're rapidly making new cells to completely replace ourselves. But here's the thing. To make a new cell requires minus 50 millivolts. So which has more electrons, minus 25 or minus 50? Minus 50 does. Even though it's numerically a smaller number, it still has more horsepower, more electrons than minus 20. So healing requires minus 50. Now here's the problem. When your voltage begins to drop below operating voltage, at a minus 15 millivolts, you're tired. At a minus 10 millivolts, you get sick. At a minus 5 millivolts, things quit working. And as voltage continues to go past 0, where we change polarity, now we're in cancer territory. All cancer occurs at plus 30 millivolts. And plus is what? Electron stealer, right? So there's everything from tired to cancer.
All right. When I heard this part right here, I was basically taking notes the way that I'm drawing this out for you. And this is basically exactly what I saw. So, once you watch his full story, basically, he was a surgeon and he had, some issues. There was like some sort of virus that went into his eye. And he was basically studying cellular biology, trying to learn how to get one cell to basically, replicate one cell to regrow a cell, because he figured if I can fix one cell, I can fix all cells. And so what he was finding out was that, typically cells will operate at minus 25 millivolts, but to heal, we need 15 millivolts. So we need an extra charge, right? We need that like an extra boost, essentially, if you will. And what he was talking about there, and what he explains later on in the videos, is basically when you begin to lose charge, or as another way of saying is, as your body becomes more acid, right? He said at minus 15, you get tired. At minus 10, you start to get sick. And then once you cross over from neutral into the acid, that's what he calls the cancer territory. And so I'm drawing out this graph this way. And basically what I saw was like, holy crap, like this is basically what happens in fermentation. It's yeast start to eat up all the oxygen, and the pH of the beer begins to drop, right? Because when I start out with water and sugar, and the pH is slightly alkaline, but as the yeast begin to consume all the oxygen, the pH begins to drop, and then ultimately beers ends up being at about a pH of 4.7 or so. And so this is basically what I saw, and I'm like, holy crap, like our gut is just like a fermentation vessel. Like our bodies, our cells, everything works exactly the same. And this is when I started to understand that if there was anything wrong with me, right, whether it was my thyroid, my liver, my gut, anything, what I needed to do was to basically bring the charge of my body up. I needed to alkalize my body. I needed to basically make sure that the cells could get to this minus 50 millivolts, which is where they are able to replicate, right? And so for me, what I found is that the higher my vitamin D levels are, the more charged that I get. Okay. So when I talk about vitamin D, this is all the stuff that's basically going on in my head. And I mean, and this is just kind of like a compressed version of it, but this is basically a way that I am trying to express and let you guys know like how much I value vitamin D. So I want to know if this stuff made sense, because I know it's kind of a, I geeked out quite a bit. So you guys are more than welcome to let me know, if this made sense, if you want me to clarify any of this. And meanwhile, I have my vitamin D here. I'm going to talk a little bit more about it, but I also want to show you that this is not a supplement. This is food, right? Supplements can be toxic. Food isn't. So I'm going to actually, in front of you guys, take like whatever I've left here, probably like 10, 12 capsules. But you guys feel free to like comment and let me know so far what you guys think of this vitamin D training.
Are you about to take 10?
You can count them.
Wow.
Here.
Amazing.
Because I mean, this is just food, and I'm going to talk about this specific. Why I use fermented cod liver oil over all the other vitamin D supplements. But oftentimes, like people ask me, like, "Hey, how much of this should I take?" And I'm like, I mean, this is just food. Like, this is literally just vitamin D that it's already been made, and it's the body just basically uptakes. And to me, this is just a way that I boost my immune system. Like this is what powers up your probiotics, and it's what builds up the charge. And so if you start to understand, this is basically like, when I give the battery analogy, you have a battery, right? And so vitamin D is like that charge that you have inside of that battery. And that's where water and minerals come into the picture. Is the minerals is the conductive material that allows you to use the charge, right? So you have a lot of people that, may be low in vitamin D. And one thing to keep in mind about vitamin D, like the ranges for vitamin D, a lot of people will say that normal ranges are between 30 to 55. but those numbers are not really, and again, like I'm not a doctor, I'm a brewer, but as far as I understand it, I've seen numbers up to like 80 plus, even more. And so like to me, like I think of vitamin D, like as long as you're getting it from food and sunshine, the higher the better. Like you can't really get to these levels unless like even like me taking like 10 or 12 right now, I'm not going to get to those levels. Like there's a lot more that goes into raising your vitamin D levels, but this is just like one of those factors. So here we go. I'm 4 in. So here's another 4 right there. But what do you guys think so far of vitamin D and what I just showed you? I mean, does it make sense? Because I know it's a little bit geeky, but anyone? Check the comments on Facebook here. All right. All right, so I'm gonna assume that everything makes sense so far. So 8. I'm gonna sleep good tonight. Sleep good tomorrow. Here's another 4. All right, and then I'll keep going. I'll take more after.
How do you know how many you need to take?
So when I first started out, I was reading this book. So I was reading this book right here, The 4-Hour Body by Tim Ferriss. And there's a chapter in here where he's talking about hormone production, essentially. Let me see if I can find this real quick. So on pages 258, this is actually how I found the product, where he's talking about fermented cod liver oil plus vitamin-rich butterfat, 2 capsules upon waking and before bed. And so this is basically what I used as a baseline, was basically using 4 capsules. But as I started to research and learn more about vitamin D, essentially like what I've found is, fermented cod liver oil, all it is, it's a fermented beverage, and it's basically known in like the northern parts of the world. But essentially, the way that I think of it is, ideally you would get basically vitamin D from the sun, but that only happens when you live in parts of the world where when you're in the like near the equator, right? Because like when you're near the equator, that's where the sun's radiation is, the highest, right? So you have, your world here. Let's see, where's the equator? Right there. So like anywhere like here in the center of the earth, like this is basically where the sun hits the most. But as you move up higher to these northern parts, right, Alaska, Canada, you have, the United Kingdom, Ukraine, Finland, Sweden, some of these countries, you don't get as much sunshine, and so they rely on fatty fishes to get their vitamin D. And so that's why this product is actually, where is this from? So this is coming from the Bering Sea and basically some parts of Alaska. And so essentially they have this as drinks. So I take them in capsules. You can also like get it in drinks. I don't know what it actually tastes like because I've never had the actual drink, but I know that some people, like when you read up on the literature, like the way that people use it, and keep in mind that like everything that has to do with fermentation is ancient wisdom. It's ancient traditions. Is basically ancient medicine. And the saying that they would say is, carrots for the eyes, fermented cod liver oil for all else that ails you. And they would basically take up to, gosh, I don't know, like there's different numbers, but like depending on what people were dealing with, like they would just take copious amounts of it. And like I realized that, like there's really there's I don't think of like this as like having a limit. I mean, I know like I've never fully taken like an entire bottle, but I know my grandma actually did take the entire bottle because, for those of you who don't know, my grandma about what was it, like 2-3 years ago, they were in a car accident. She was riding the back seat on the passenger side, and basically they got T-bone, and like grandma got like the impact, like she was on the side of the impact, and so she had like broken ribs, and like we were really concerned that, I mean, she's like in her what was she, like 80 something, but we weren't sure if she was going to make it. And so when she was in the hospital, um, I'm there and I'm basically things like, wow, like I need to like help grandma recover fast. And so when I think of like vitamin D, one of the things about vitamin D, and it's the other part that I was going to read from, this book, Vitamin D, the inhibitor here. Let me go to this view for a second. So in here, one of the things that he talks about vitamin D is that, where is it? I didn't bookmark this one, but basically, what the quote that I read from here that made sense for me was that vitamin D allows the body to absorb calcium, right? And so calcium, the reason why this made a lot of sense was because when I brew beer, calcium is basically what I use to control pH. And so as I started to understand like what was going on, with me, with my diet, and whenever I see people's diets, like this is the kind of stuff that enters my mind, and this is why like diet makes so much sense now, and I understand why people that are on diets are like low fat, high carbohydrates. I'll find a quote later on, but essentially you have people that get this back. So you have people that you eat carbohydrates, and essentially what happens is that when your pH begins to drop, and essentially when you're eating carbs, your body's essentially needing to ferment and digest those carbohydrates, and one of the things that it needs is calcium, is one of the minerals, right, that it needs. There's magnesium, manganese, zinc, copper, and but the one that it's needed quite a bit is calcium. And so if your vitamin D levels drop, number one, that's basically what kind of holds your calcium together, right? So this is why a lot of people that have these vitamin deficiencies like vitamins A and D, they start to get joint and bone pain. It's because their calcium is basically starting to kind of like dissolve from their bones. And this is why like when grandma, like when she had broken ribs, I knew that what she needed more than anything was vitamin D, because that was basically the way that the body was going to allow her to absorb calcium to basically repair those broken bones. And so I was basically going to the hospital and bringing her, fermented cod liver oil to take as vitamin D. And she felt so good with it. Like, she noticed the difference. Like, I remember, like, I would buy her bottles, and like one time, like, I started like telling her, it's like, oh, try to take a little bit more. And like, I tried like 20 capsules myself. And I told her, like, I've taken up to 20 capsules. Cause she was asking me the same questions. Like, how do I know how much to take? And I'm like, honestly, grandma, like, this is just food. I mean, I think right now you need it. So just, the more, the better in this case. And one day, like, she told me, like, I asked her, like, hey, have you taken your vitamin D? And she's like, yeah. And like, how much? And she's like, I just took the whole bottle. She's like so cute, like, telling me about that. But like, she felt great. And so that's the most that I've known someone has taken. Like, for me, the most I've ever taken is like 20 capsules. And I don't do it like that often, but like, whenever I get any signs, like, for example, when this whole pandemic thing started, I'm like, I need to boost my immune system. And how did I boost my immune system? I just took like 20 of these, and I was fine. So here goes another 4. There's gonna be a total of 16 for today, and that's it. If I had more, I would do the full 20, but I'm out. But anyways, I mean, that's it. Like, this is just food, and this is a reason why I use it. So the last thing that I want to point out with this is that once you start to understand that, like, a lot of the issues that we're dealing with are gut related issues, basically what that means that we're not able to digest. And fermentation, all it is basically there's digestion, and then there's a continuation of digestion. So if you take like a carbohydrate, a protein, or in the case of fermented cod liver oil, oil being a fat, all of these nutrients are like a chain. And digestion is nothing more than basically breaking that chain up into smaller components. And once you get to the smaller components, right? So in the case of fats, you have, your omega-9s, omega-6, omega-3s, right? This is basically the digested version of it. Once you get to like omega-3, it's kind of like in sugar, you have starch, and then you have dextrins, and then you have your simple sugars like glucose, fructose, and some of these other ones. Once you get to like that single link, digestion ends, and then fermentation begins. So in the case of beer, sugar basically gets turned into alcohol. In the case of fat, there's other things that happen with it. But in that process of fermentation, what I want you guys to understand is that that's where vitamins and other nutrients are created, is through fermentation. That's why, like, if you go buy regular cod liver oil and you read the label, you're going to see that the nutrients that you're getting from it are omega-3 and omega-6. But when you get fermented cod liver oil, you're going to see that the nutrients here are basically vitamins A and D. And it's, again, something that I learned from brewing beer, that, through fermentation is what creates vitamins, right? In the case of beer, you have like a beer like Hefeweizen. Fermentation is what will make the B vitamins. That's what brewers' yeast tend to produce a lot of, is B vitamins, which is why people that maybe B, a lot of people here probably B vitamin deficient as well. Common supplement that people are told to take is basically brewer's yeast, right? And that's because that's what makes B vitamins for you. But the thing to understand with that is that if you have those digestive issues, you can't just take cod liver oil and expect your gut to convert it into vitamin D, because you don't have that gut flora, and you don't have the environment in your gut. And that's the issue, right? It's the same thing with other nutrients like iron, right? You typically get that from the food that you eat, But if you don't have the right gut flora, if you don't have the ability to digest, you're still going to be deficient in iron. Same thing with selenium. All right, people ask me about selenium. Silica is another one that people ask me about. Zinc, copper, manganese. All of these deficiencies are happening because we don't have the digestive issue. And so this product is the only one that I know that will actually work with people that have, autoimmune conditions. A lot of people that are taking, their vitamin D3 supplements that are, 3,000 IUs or 5,000 IUs, and some people are taking even way more than that, like 25, 50,000. This is undigested. That's the biggest thing that I hope people that watch this video understand, is that it's undigested. And so when it's going into your gut, it's practically a rock and your body's not going to be able to break it down. Fermentation gives you the probiotics, and it gives you like the nutrients already made. So your body's just basically uptaking it. And as you begin to increase your charge, right, your probiotics begin to grow stronger, and that begins to improve your digestion. So for a lot of people, just by doing the water, the minerals, and this vitamin D is like, you'll see a world of a difference. And for a lot of people that are, taking a lot of supplements that don't seem to be working, this could be like the answer that all of a sudden, like, oh, wow, like all these other things that I'm taking now, all of a sudden they're going to start to work. That's because it's helping you with your digestion, right? This is the reason why, like the last component for energy, there's a nutrient called coenzyme Q10. And think of that like a switch that you flip on, and that powers on the system. And so the reason why I don't tell people to go buy coenzyme Q10 right away is because I know that if they take coenzyme Q10, but they're not drinking water, they're not mineralized, and they don't have the right levels of vitamin D, this ain't going to work, because the body needs to be able to digest and uptake the nutrients. And that doesn't happen when you don't have the right gut flora, right? So this is just basically building the foundation so that when we start moving into detoxing, when we start moving into, nutrient deficiencies, and, helping you guys like understand and get all of the actual nutrients that your body needs, this is the foundation. This is why like people try to like get me to, I don't know, like sometimes people reach out to me, it's like, hey, I'm tired, like, can you help me? And I'm like, well, are you drinking water and minerals? And then they're like they think that that's too basic, and so they go away. But I'm like, I can't give you anything else, because without that, nothing else is going to work, right? And this is why like I'm doing these programs and why I'm doing these challenges. It's because if you guys don't do this, I can't help you. Like, I can't help you grow probiotics. I can't help you restructure your gut flora. I'm going to do it at, the energy bootcamp starting on May 1st. Throughout that program, 6 weeks, the main thing that is going to happen is hydration and vitamin D. Like, that's not going to go away. That's like the foundation to everything. And that's one of the reasons why I'm basically doing whatever it is that I can to help you guys understand that this is where you need to focus before you go buy any other supplement. Okay, any other supplement is going to be a waste of time until you take care of this. Once you take care of this, then we can go to work and we can start to actually make some progress. So I hope that this is clear. I hope that I did a good job at explaining this. Did I do a good job? You guys can give me some feedback. Yes, no. All right, let me check the comments here on Facebook. And if you guys don't have any questions, then that's all that I've got for today. So I'm glad that I was able to keep this under an hour. All right, cool. All right, guys. Well, that's pretty much all that I've got for today. So I hope that you found this lesson valuable, and I hope that you guys got the importance of vitamin D. and that's going to be our focus for the next week. So if you guys are participating in the hydration challenge, keep posting your pictures of water and minerals. You guys are now starting to understand where that comes from, why it's important, how that fits into the big picture. And now you guys are starting to understand the importance of vitamin D as the second most important and basic thing that you got to do. And then after this, we're going to start actually talking about diet, nutrient depletions, and all of these other things that are going to be leading up to the to energy bootcamp for those of you who are looking to participate. I'm excited for that. You're welcome, Chris, and I hope you guys have a great rest of your night. Thank you for hanging out. Thank you, Christina, and I'll see you guys later. See ya.